a very warm welcome to FSC Connect. It's been a little while over this last quarter since we've run too many of our FSC Connect programs. To all of you watching, this, of course, is our way to continue to bring the financial services community together to talk about things that matter. And there are a lot of things that matter at the moment and will continue to do so. So a very warm welcome back to FSC Connect. It was great to see so many people at the recent conference, and there's a really good runway of activity planned over the next few weeks before we all break for Christmas. Today's conversation, folks, we're delighted to be joined by the Deputy Privacy Commissioner, Liz MacPherson, and Senior Manager at ANZ, Sue Peart, for a conversation on privacy and the outlook for 2023. There's obviously lots of stuff going on, and today's discussion, like all our FSC Connects, are going to be an engaged and interesting discussion. We are on the record, so we are recording this, and always these are interactive conversations. So if you're new to Zoom or not new to Zoom, feel free to use the Q&A and chat button so you can chat with both Sue and Liz as they go through their discussion. It's now 3:32. I'm going to leave you in the very capable hands of Sue Peart, who, as I say, is Senior Manager Privacy and Data Protection at ANZ, and with Liz MacPherson from the Privacy Commission as Deputy Privacy Commissioner. So, ladies, very warm welcome, and Sue, over to you.
Thank you, Richard. Kia ora, everybody. I am Sue Peart and I lead the ANZ privacy team. I feel very honoured and privileged to be here today to facilitate Outlook 2022 and hosting Liz MacPherson as Deputy Privacy Commissioner. Welcome to Liz, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Sue. Kia ora koutou katoa.
Fantastic. I just wanted to start with a quick overview. There is a resume within the documents that went out, but I just thought for everyone's purposes, I'll just quickly run through it. So Liz joined the Office of the Privacy Commissioner in April 2020 as Assistant Privacy Commissioner, Policy and Operations, and then she was quickly appointed to the statutory Deputy Commissioner role in November 2021. And in this capacity, she then went on to act as Privacy Commissioner from 1 January to 4 July until Michael took the role in July. Liz has had an extensive public service career spanning over 30 years, including policy, operations, regulatory, strategy, and corporate governance roles. She's also held a number of Deputy Chief Executive positions at the Ministry of Economic Development and MB before being appointed to the position of Government Statistician in 2013 and later Government Chief Data Steward. Now you lead the Office's Policy, Compliance and Enforcement and Investigations and Dispute Resolution teams. So thank you, Liz. That's great that we feel very lucky to have you. Just looking at your background and career to date, Liz, how has that shaped you, just looking back to the role that you're in now?
That's a good question, Sue. Actually, I think that so my career has been in government, as you say. I obviously joined the government very public service very early, given I've been in it for 30 years, and that's really focused me on public service and on making a difference for New Zealanders. But particularly more recently, I think in my role prior to coming to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, I was very, very focused at statistics on the use of data, and in the statistical background, you're always very conscious about confidentiality and on using data in an aggregated form so that you are able to make sense from the data and innovate, but protect the individuals who lie behind it, and a real focus on the fact that data is about people. Same thing translates to this role. Here we're very focused on the fact that personal information is power, for the individuals themselves, but it can also be used in powerful ways by agencies such as those represented here today to provide services and to assist others. So
absolutely.
Privacy is about safe use of information.
Yeah. I want to move on next to really set the scene. Privacy in a modern and digital world. With Michael having recently come into the office, what is the current vision for achievement in the OPC office? Or maybe if I can put it a different way, what does privacy in a modern and digital world in 2022 mean to the OPC office? And what does good regulation of it look like going forward in response?
Well, just in terms of setting that scene, we live in an exciting and a precarious new world. And I think that the world that we've just lived through with COVID has painted that very clearly for us. Information is now gathered digitally in huge swathes across multiple platforms and databases, and algorithms and artificial intelligence are making decisions that affect our choices as well as the decisions that are made about us. Ours is an increasingly online world. We know that...
With no borders.
With no borders. And we know that there are young people who have been born into that world. They know no other world. We know that thanks to COVID, the data shows that here in New Zealand, there was a 52% growth in online shopping in 2021 alone. And there's an expectation that in terms of that sort of online purchasing, that the share of retail in that area is going to go up to about 83% by 2026. So we are living more of our lives online. Our social lives, our work lives, sharing information in a whole variety of different ways. So, people search, shop, bank, learn from within their four walls. Huge amounts of data are being uploaded, downloaded, and shared every second of every day. And I guess the point is, for every use of data for good, and let's face it, the reason why we all do this is because it's convenient, it's exciting, it's fun, it keeps us connected. There are people intentionally using it for harm, deceiving community members into providing personal account or credential information, infecting devices, motivating individuals to perform actions as part of a scam.
We know about it.
We might talk about that later.
Yes.
And people have the darkest moments of their lives played out across the media because of information about them that's available online. And we know that one of the things that's really front and centre for us at the moment is that some of the new search tools that are available out there, the new search technologies, are effectively flipping on its head the idea of what someone might choose to make publicly available to what is accessible to a very powerful search tool, which may well be able to unlock things or at least, get inside things that people thought they had locked down. So we just need to bear all of those sorts of things in mind. So, when we think and your people think about your clients, your customers, your members and employees, what information has they entrusted to you, and are you taking every possible step to ensure that it's protected? So from our perspective, that's the sort of environment we know we're working in. We also know that, that environment has developed at speed and and regulation, while it's done a pretty good job of keeping up with it where it's principled based, still is stretched. So that's the space that we're operating in, and I think in that context, your question about what does good regulation look like here? I think, as I said, the principle-based nature of the Privacy Act has stood it in good stead, but against that sort of backdrop, we actually need to keep refreshing privacy rights and legal frameworks quite regularly. And we also need to be thinking about things from a more of a assurance basis as well. To what extent can you as a bank or you as an insurance company actually assure yourselves and your customers and us that you are actually keeping the information that is entrusted with very safe right across its full life cycle.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if I can just take a moment or two just to add to your comments, quite controversially, I suppose, for some, but I'm a big fan of Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, and at the latest IAPP conference, he gave, I'm sure you've watched it, he gave this wonderful speech, and he spoke about privacy being a fundamental right, and he acknowledged that although it's not an easy one, it's one of the most essential battles that we face, and so in terms of looking for inspiration for my everyday sort of work, I always think of him. He speaks. Yes, I mean, he speaks very much about a world without privacy is a world without creativity and innovation. And it's all, in my view, it's very much about finding that balance, about protecting the personal information of individuals, but also allowing the freedom of economic actors to really take advantage of new opportunities provided by these new technologies.
I would agree. The technology in and of itself is neither good nor evil.
Yes.
The way we use it. But I would agree entirely with his sentiments. The privacy is actually a gateway right.
Yeah.
Rights. And it does allow us, and this brings me back to children, for example, it allows us the space to develop our identities. It allows us space to, to consider what we believe in, who we're going to vote for, all of those sort of questions. And so from that perspective, we have to think several times about, those risks and how we build a safe online environment, one where we can pull those benefits but mitigate those risks as much as possible.
Correct. And then just one last question on this subject. How do you see the role of the OPC in helping our financial services organisations better safeguard the privacy of the customers? Is there a short answer to that? Or
the short answer is that one of the things we're looking at the moment is that the Privacy Act, as I said, has stood the test of time. It is a principle-based piece of legislation, and that means it's very flexible and can respond to different contexts. But sometimes people have told us that they find the principle-based nature of it actually a bit paralysing because people feel a little bit uncertain about whether what they're doing is actually going to be appropriate or not. So one of the things we're looking at doing here is providing more certainty to agencies about how to give effect to the Privacy Act, and developing what we're describing as a bit more of a privacy risk management approach.
Yeah.
So I think that coming alongside the financial services organisations you're talking about and providing a bit more certainty, I think should help.
Yeah, it does. I mean, just from our side and sort of privacy teams, that's, the business just reach out to us all day, just with queries, how to apply the principles in this situation. If we add this in, if we take that scenario out. So yes, we would welcome that, especially with the risk-based approach, as you say, very sort of pragmatic in today's times. If I can move on to the Privacy Act itself now and upcoming changes. Now, I'm aware that you don't actually set sort of annual sort of reviews of the Privacy Act, but just I know we've just arguably been through quite a recent overhaul of it with the 2021 sort of changes that came into effect. But I did want to know, do you have any inkling of changes? I say this because obviously we sit on this side of the Tasman watching what's playing out across the ditch and watching, the Attorney General speak about the increased fines from 2.2 million to the 50 million. There's a three-tier sort of test that they're talking about, either the greater of the 50 million, 3 times the value of any benefit obtained through misuse, or lastly 30% of the company's turnover. I mean, that's a hell of a sort of change from our 10,000, isn't it? We're sitting quite differently.
We are. Well, to answer your question, yes, the Ministry of Justice is responsible for the actual Privacy Act. So we regulate against that act, but they're responsible for it. And you're quite right. The 2020 changes are relatively recent, but they were based on reviews that took place, at least sort of 7 years before that. So they were somewhat dated by the time they were introduced. And yes, we are looking across the ditch. Interestingly, if those changes do come in place, I think that Australia will end up having some of the toughest penalties in the world. And that 30% of turnover is right up there. From our perspective, we are thinking about. There's that issue about whether how much of a motivating factor penalties are. In our particular case, we don't. We have the 10,000. Australia already has 2.2 million for the larger entities. And so we don't even have that starting base. So yes, in terms of our consideration of whether our act has stood the test of time, that is something that's we're thinking, obviously factoring at this point. But there's nothing on the radar at the moment in that area. What we do have, though, is the Ministry of Justice has just recently consulted on a proposal to change the notification requirements. At the moment in New Zealand, we have a requirement to notify if you collect information directly about an individual. And what the Ministry of Justice has just consulted on is introducing a
indirect
notification. That would bring us into line with the Europeans. And so just going through the process now of thinking about, if they do go ahead with that, how that would work. And there were a number of ways that we consulted on, including the closest to the current collection method for direct collection would be that the obligation would fall on the collecting agency. So.
Yes, because from the financial services side, I think we have real questions around that approach. For example, we use the mortgage broker sort of model and how that plays out pragmatically in terms of the notifications. We just foresee that potentially there's a situation where there's over-notification, notification fatigue. As banks, we already have quite lengthy privacy collection notices, and so it might even lead to even more confusion, anxiety for customers. So
the Ministry of Justice has received all of the submissions on the through the consultation exercise and is weighing up those very things.
Exactly. I want to just go back, if I can, just back to the Australian Act, because there's one particular sort of aspect that that they're looking at changing, which I think may well have some real impact to New Zealand. Apart from that, obviously, they're looking to introduce right to erasure, strengthen consent rights, broadening the personal information definition. What they're at the moment, in terms of scope of the Act, is very much around whether organisations have what they call an Australian link.
Mm-hmm.
So at the moment, that is a two-tier test. One, if you carry on business in Australia, and that goes on, there's actually guidance out there in terms of that says that that includes registering trademarks in Australia or selling goods online to people in Australia. But the second tier is whether you collect or hold information from a source inside Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll know from the financial services industry that there are many of us that have good parent sort of relationships with Australian companies. So I understand that they're looking to do away with that second tier, which makes it obviously much easier for us to be caught by the proposed new online privacy bill in Australia. I just wondered, how engaged is OPC sort of in the discussions with the Information Commissioner's office over there? And would it ever be foreseeable that we could ask, for example, clarity to be obtained from that office and how that will play out in a New Zealand context? I mean, I suppose the worst scenario is that you have a situation where we all caught potentially those with parent companies in Australia by two privacy acts.
Well, first, we do work closely together. In fact, the Commissioner has actually just returned from Turkey, and the Global Privacy Forum and was having conversations over there with all of the other heads of privacy and data protection authorities, including Australia. And then very shortly, he will be attending the IAPP in Australia and visiting the OIAC then. So we have a close relationship, and this is just the sort of thing that we'll be talking about, is the relationship between our two pieces of legislation and how that plays out for organisations.
That's good news.
And to work in both countries. But in the meantime, the best advice is the advice that I'm no doubt that you're already following, which is, where you have activities that involve personal information of customers across borders, that you ensure that you do have the right frameworks in place to be sure about the statutory obligations that apply to your actions, and that you stay close.
Exactly.
The two.
Yeah. I mean, there are many similarities between the two, but there are some obviously there are some differences. I am going to move on now to biometrics. Unfortunately, Liz, we're on a strict time schedule here. I know we could talk a lot. And I've got lots of questions. I'm not going to get to them all, but on the biometrics, obviously there are many members on the call today that would have all put in submissions in response. Is it too early to say, but are there any first impressions that have been formed that, in regard to impending change? Any need, for example, to call out differences in approach between business and government? I did hear via the proverbial grapevine that there are some sort of submissions that are suggesting, for example, certain biometrics are only limited to use in government agencies and restricted from private agencies, for example.
Well, the short answer is it's too early.
Okay. Yeah,
but we're very grateful to the FSC and all your members for taking the time to make what were substantive submissions on the paper. We've received a very large number of submissions from a really diverse range of stakeholders, and we're working our way through them and deciding on our next step. So as I say, it would be premature to indicate any particular direction at this point.
And timing-wise, are you targeting end of the year, beginning of next year? Was it too early to say?
We were hoping, and obviously, if we need to revise this and let people know, we were hoping to be in a position to have decided what our next steps might be by the end of the year. If we need to push that out into early next year, we will. But that was our preliminary.
Okay.
Particularly if we end up with some form of code, then we'd be wanting to start work on that in the early in the new year. And as you know, if we were to go down the route of a code under the Privacy Act, that involves another round of statutory consultation.
Yeah. I just thought, for the benefit of the members on the call, I know you're talking about a range of proposed regulatory action, ranging from no regulatory action in terms of the biometrics to, from what we understood, certainly that you a strong hint towards a code of practice that you tending to opt for at this stage, to possible changes to the Act. I don't know if you want to elaborate at all.
Well, like you said, there are a range of possible scenarios, as you say, from no change, less likely to be changes to the Act. What would be more likely, and as you say, our preliminary sort of gut feel was potentially a code of practice, which, as I said, the Privacy Commissioner can promulgate under the Privacy Act. It has the force of law, regulation. It's effectively regulation. And the aim behind it would be to provide more certainty. And essentially what we're aiming for here is something which, if we go down that track, provides more certainty both to mitigate against risks, but also to give more certainty so that those who need to use biometrics can use it in innovative ways. So it's trying to achieve both of those things.
Right. From our side in the financial services industry, obviously, I think we'd be fair to say that we operate sort of across sort of the spectrum here. One, on the verification and authentication piece, which we would obviously see as low risk, very convenient to the end customer, very fast and efficient. Two, we see, obviously we're involved certainly on the banking side in monitoring for fraud, sort of looking to use, we would see that more sort of as a medium risk. And obviously then there's that large commercial, large scale surveillance type activity, which we would see in the high risk. So I wouldn't mind just your comments on that, looking for encouragement that the OPC will be taking very much a risk-based approach, that it wouldn't be a one-size-fits-all, just to allow that innovation to continue.
Well, from our perspective, our mantra is to take a risk-based approach. That is our approach. Good to hear. We're always looking at things from the point of view of the likelihood of harm. And so, whatever we come up with, we will inevitably be taking that sort of approach. And we are conscious of the fact that there are a variety of different ways in which biometrics can be used. We're also, and we're very much aware that in many spheres, in many sectors, biometrics are seen as being a way of reducing some of the risks associated with collecting a whole range of other types of personal information as well. And as you say, you've talked about authentication. But we do need to make sure that we are covering off some of the larger risks as well, and remembering that biometrics are, by definition, somebody's most sensitive personal and information. Yeah. And if you lose it, it's not like losing a password. It can have a really dramatic effect on people. So we're taking this seriously, both in terms of the risk to the individual, but also seriously in terms of the opportunities that are out there for innovation, for the benefit of individuals and for society.
I think a lot of agencies around the world are looking at this, or I should say overseas regulators particularly. I was just reading the other day that I think it's a Canadian act that they're actually making changes to the act itself to deal with biometrics. Anyway, so it's top of mind for everybody. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't rule that out in the future, but certainly if we were looking to do something in the short term, then a code might be to be a bridging mechanism.
Yeah, I agree. I like the principle based, and obviously the financial services industry is well versed with working with codes of practice. We already work with one. Obviously, biometrics is just one type of sensitive personal information. I know that we don't define sensitive, but there is guidance around it that you've put out. Can we expect, sort of going down the track, that there might be further guidance on, for example, different other types of personal information? For example, I'm just thinking financial information, location data, ethnicity, health,
So just to go back to the point I made at the beginning of the session, we're very conscious of the fact that organisations come to us and ask for guidance, and we want to provide that additional certainty, so that agencies can develop systems, design systems that are fit for purpose for them, but consistent with the direction of the Privacy Act. So look for us in the future to be doing more in this particular area. So codes are something that we haven't used very often, so we may look to use them more often, but certainly guidance, position papers, we want to provide more certainty for the regulation.
That's good to hear, and we look forward to working with you on those when they come out. I'm going to move now to just talking more about financial services and privacy compliance. A lot of people on the call will just have those, sort of roles within their organisation. Within the financial services industry at the moment in Australia and in New Zealand, we are completely inundated with new compliance regulation. So bearing that in mind, and the nature of our membership from the small to the large organisations, any advice or tips that you would give to our privacy officers on the call and getting the message across to their boards, the executives, that privacy really needs to be, prioritised and for it to be kept top of mind?
Well, I would actually suggest that there's nothing better than to look at the current Optus breach across the we're talking here about a telco which has had to rebuild its entire 10 million customer database in order to find out.
I heard they lost a tenth of their customers. Yeah, isn't that staggering?
Staggering. And we'll find out down the track with the very many reviews that are currently underway as to why this happened in the first place. But at least, on the surface of things, it would look like it wasn't, is because it was a sophisticated hack. There were some vulnerabilities that should have been taken care of that weren't being taken care of, but we'll know more about that down the track. But look, if you ever needed something to put in front of your directors, Optus is it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the very basic things that need to be taken on board, from thinking about the information you collect through its whole life cycle. To quote Mike O'Donnell Mod the other day, take Muddy Waters' song, you can't lose what you ain't got. As a mantra. I mean, one of the first rules in this situation is, do you actually need this information in the first place? You can't.
Yes.
You can't actually be hacked for something you don't have.
No.
But use this as a lesson. There are many, many, many individual lessons in this, but one of them is to, understand what you collect. What do you actually hold? Do you understand the life cycle of that information, from when it's collected, who uses it, who has access to it, how it's stored, and whether and when you make decisions about what to delete? Because that's actually also something that came out of the Optus breach, is that many of the individuals whose information is now out there were past customers.
Yes, so they should never have had the information exactly.
So,
I just thought I agree with you. Yeah, sorry, I've interrupted you.
No, I was just going to say, so does the right information get to your board? Are you making sure that they actually see this? Do your risk and assurance committees see the management of information and privacy as part of that, as being a critical part of maintaining the reputation of your organisation, the trust and confidence of your customers? And from that perspective, it's not a nice to have. It's absolutely essential.
Absolutely. And Australia's having a really fine time with it all, aren't they? I was just reading as well that in Australia, they've actually picked up through the Australian Cyber Security Centre that there's one cyber attack in Australia every 7 minutes at the moment. Yeah, it's quite staggering. And you do wonder whether it's tied into sort of, the economy and where things are, that, that people are just reaching out to this ransomware, which I believe you can just literally purchase off the web. So yeah,
well, that's been one of the, as I said, technology can be, it's got this
yes.
good or evil. But look, I would just say, look, if no one is invulnerable, but if this ever happens to you, you do not want it to be the reasons that we're preventable. So make sure that you are securing the information that you've got. And I just noticed something that flashed up on the screen with the biometric information. Storage is going to be critically important. It is actually possible to hack into systems like that. And once you do, that is an extraordinarily high risk. That's also
exactly
possible for attackers to modify or intercept data and replay or capture biometric samples. There's all sorts of things that can happen. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be using biometrics. We are not in that space here at OPC. What we are saying is that we should be applying due diligence and, as you say, taking a risk lens to this.
Yes. No, I just thought, for the benefit of the members on the call, just for those that haven't read about it, the Optus data breach was the attack was via an API that had not been secured. And Angeline Falk, the Australian Information Commissioner, like her biggest call out is for organisations also to just ask themselves, have we taken reasonable steps to safeguard the personal information that we have? Yeah.
Under the New Zealand Privacy Act, one of the principles, as you know, is IPv5. It is about the security of the information. And I would really encourage agencies to ask themselves that question. If you ever had a hack, could you answer that question? Could you answer that yes, you have taken all reasonable steps to secure it and to keep it safe?
And certainly the Optus response that has played out in the media has been far from perfect. So, I would certainly be encouraging organisations to really look at their data breach response plans. How would you as an organisation be able to reach your customers in that kind of scenario? How quickly could you reach them? I know that banks, we've all been roped into helping.
Yeah, well, I actually happened to be over in Australia very shortly after the Optus breach, and I was on holiday, but it turned out to be a real busman's holiday because you couldn't escape discussions of privacy. But one thing I would say in terms of my experiences working with breached agencies since I've been in this organisation is that incident response plan, and in particular putting your customers first and actually them at the centre, is critically important. And if you're in a situation where, for example, you've been breached and you don't know the full extent of the breach, you don't know how much information is out there, you're far better to be honest with your customers and go out there quickly and let them know the situation that you're in, and that as soon as you know more, you'll be letting them know, then let them find out from the source. So communication is critically important, as well as, you need to have a breach response plan that, just like your emergency plan for a fire or an earthquake, you don't have to think about it. You can actually do it. So the costs of breaches, as flicking up on the screen at the moment, are huge. They will increase. And you can just imagine how much it's costing Optus to put this right. What I often say when they say to me, well, you've only got a $10,000 penalty you can throw at people, or a fine you can throw at people, my response to that is the loss of customers, the loss of reputation, the cost of putting something right, the cost of replacing all of those passports and driver's licenses for those customers. Yeah, this is a sort of
prohibitive. Absolutely. And I mean, daily we just continue to see examples of frauds perpetrated on those that Optus client base, customer base. We're unfortunate towards the end, but just I wanted to ask one or two questions just looking forward. What do you see as the biggest challenges the OPC office faces going forward, and how do you intend tackling those? We've got 2 minutes.
I'm just going to say digital privacy. Yeah. So the biggest issues for us are around the online environment, digital privacy, and I think as well, really supporting businesses, organisations like yourselves, to take that whole of life cycle risk assurance approach. But the digital world is where it is.
Yes, I feel the same. Also, from what you've seen recently, I remember I used to often hear John Edwards, sort of as he was closing off a seminar, people would throw out a question, where do you think you're going to issue your first compliance notice? And he would rattle off a few examples and it would keep us all, agitated as to when our industry would be next. But obviously you've RBNZ had a compliance notice issued against them. The rental industry's been in focus. I see the police are copying it at the moment for their taking of photos. What sector would the OPC like to see an example made of? Is there any lines in the sand, examples that they're looking for to issue the next compliance notice? Keep us on our toes.
Look, we are watching any sectors where there are large data breaches. But I think the focus that we're talking about is we will only issue a compliance notice where we don't get action, right? So, when we reach out to you with a warning, when we give you some sort of an advisory, sort of effectively say to you, look, we've seen a number of data breaches now. This is come. You've had 4 strikes. Please take notice first up, because from our perspective, compliance notices are something that we would prefer not to issue. Because actually what we're wanting is a good outcome for you and for your customers in particular. What is in our sights at the moment are any areas where there are large quantities of personal information being collected and held, and an intersection between that and an imbalance of power, basically. That's why we're sector.
Okay, Liz, thank you. That's been so informative. I've really enjoyed that. We're going to just move to question and answers. There have been a lot that have come in, and thanks to all those that have submitted them. I'm just going to go through sort of a few that we've picked out. The first one is a question from Andy. He says, my biggest worry is the security of the producer groups, CRMs and databases. To belong to those groups, we need to pass our clients' information onto these. Who holds responsibility for that data security? Under our FSLR requirements, we are responsible for any outsourcing, but we have no control over the producer group security.
Yes. Well, I mean, under the Privacy Act, the individual, the organisation, the agency that is collecting the information and holding the information is responsible. If you are using an agent, then you are still responsible, and that means that you need to be very careful about the way that you contract. So in contracting with that agency, you need to make sure that you have assured yourself that they can take account of those risks on your behalf. But it remains your liability under the Privacy Act.
Yes, and those assessments can be quite complex. They often have to broken down, sort of understand the process flow, who's the controller, who's the processor. Yeah.
But again, put yourself in the shoes of Optus. You want to make sure that you've taken due care. Mm-hmm.
Yes. The next one is, if privacy is a fundamental right, shouldn't it be added to the New Zealand Bill of Rights? Yes. This would require the NZ BORA assessments of new legislation to comment on how new legislation will impact on privacy. Any comments?
Well, only to say that I understand that the Chief Justice expressed the same view the other day at a speaking event that she was at for. So, obviously people with more sway than myself think similarly. Mm.
And then it says here, I would like to know how you feel the Privacy Act will deal with the CBDC in daily use in the future. I'm not, I might have to skip that one unless someone can tell me what the acronym is. CBDC, Financial Service Industry is littered with acronyms. I thought I'd heard them.
I'm not familiar with that particular acronym, but
okay, I'm going to unfortunately move on. The next one is, will there be more stringent storage requirements in place for biometric information that surpass those in the current Privacy Act?
Well, that's something we'll need to give some consideration to, but I would just say the IPP5 is a principle-based piece of legislation. So, it's part of a principle-based piece of legislation. So when you're told that you need to take reasonable steps, it's reasonable steps based on what it is you are protecting. So you need to make sure that that storage and that security is fit for purpose for whatever it is that you are protecting, and take a risk-based approach.
Off the back of a significant data breach, what questions would your OPC office typically be asking of our membership agencies? Like, what questions would you be asking, in the consideration of issuance of a compliance notice, if I could say?
Oh, well, we would be looking at whether you'd taken all reasonable steps to protect that information. Now, I don't know how many of your agencies or your officers have been in contact with us over a data breach, but, you know, we start off by hand-holding. Ordinarily, when people call us because they've had a data breach, we are in a situation where we're effectively saying, right, let's just calm down and think this one through. So we are, you know, we're initially very much focused on, have you actually quarantined this? You know, have you quarantined this issue? And any potential for any further leakage. And then it's a very real focus initially on the individuals. What are you doing to protect the individuals, to allow those individuals to protect themselves? So the threshold, there's a requirement under the Act to notify us, and as you know, we've given people guidelines that we're expecting that within 72 hours. In terms of notification of individuals, the threshold for not notifying individuals because you think that it might cause them harm is actually pretty high. So the expectation is that you will be notifying individuals unless there's a very good reason otherwise. So we will test that through, and then it'll be a matter of understanding how the breach was caused and whether you could have taken any reasonable steps to avoid it. I mean, in most cases, we're actually looking for people to, I mean, let's face it, what we want is for this not to happen. One of the things we almost inevitably find when we talk to people about their data breaches is that there have been near misses. And if those near misses had actually been attended to, we probably wouldn't be in this situation. So, you know, keeping a really good reporting, internal reporting of non-serious harm breaches is really good practice. If you learn from those, then you're less likely to have the serious harm breaches themselves.
One last question, I think. How do you justify increasing use of biometric information in the light of data minimization trends worldwide?
We will always be focusing on data minimization, and as I said earlier, it's basically one of the primary ways of protecting, and organisations protect themselves. Only collect what you need, and then you only have to look after that amount of information. In some cases, biometric information can mean that you have to collect less personal information, but it has its own risks. So we are looking at this in the round. And that's why the consultation this time round was so useful. And if we go down the route of a code, we will be consulting again.
Thanks, Liz. Well, I think we've come to the end of our allotted time period, but I must say it's been extremely informative. I've really enjoyed chatting to you and getting your views. And yes, thanks. I look forward to working with the OPC going forward, and that further guidance that you speak of to come. Look forward to that.
Thank you, Sue. And can I just say a huge thank you to all of your members and the people who are on this line who tend to be focused on privacy and risk. You do a great job. You know, thank you for what you do, and we're always very keen to work with you to help you build the capability of your organisations to keep individuals' personal information safe. So thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Hand back to Richard.
Yeah. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Liz. Really informative discussion and very timely and topical, as you say, with the Optus breach. I think most directors are probably thinking it's not a question of if but when, and are we ready, and kind of bringing that mindset to the table. So thank you hugely, Liz, for stepping into the breach and taking the time. We'd love to have you back again, perhaps in person at an event. And Sue, awesome. And Sue, expertly facilitated. Thank you for stepping into the host chair. Folks, this event has been recorded, will be available up on our YouTube channel shortly. So appreciate you taking time in your day to come and join us for this discussion. There was some really great conversation in the Q&A and chat button, so thank you to all of those people, and to the broader reg and risk community in the FSC. Thanks for making this happen. Most of the sessions we produce are because someone in the membership says, hey, it would be great to do X or Y or Z, and we're really happy to facilitate that. A couple of upcoming things just on that topic. There's an economic harm conversation. We're obviously in the final stretch to Christmas, so we've got a couple of events in Auckland and Welly, including our research launch for our final piece of research on the 1st of December, and we've just about to launch our Future Ready Advice Summit, kicking into next year. So busy to the end of the year, busy into the start of next year. In the meantime, thank you everyone for taking the time. Again, Liz and Sue, thank you. And Kia ora, have a great afternoon and rest of the week. Bye for now, everybody.